It's time. Took me a while to make this video because I wasn't really sure how to approach it. You see, because I don't really know how to draw mechs, or specifically how to draw mechs. The way I draw mechs is the same way I draw everything else. I'm really wary about making videos like this where it's about drawing a specific kind of thing, because it really isn't any different once you know the fundamentals of drawing, like perspective and form and proportion. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to say things as generally as I can and approach it not as if I'm specifically drawing a mech, but just a piece of design. So even if you're not interested in learning how to draw mechs, every time I say the word mech, you can just replace it with whatever it is you want to draw. I'll give you an example. Hey guys, today I'm going to be teaching you how to draw hentai. First things first, before we even start drawing, we need to come up with an idea for a mech. Coming up with an idea is half the battle. First, we have to ask ourselves a few questions. The most basic ones, in fact. What? What the? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. This is stuff you learn in elementary school, but trust me, it's still important. Okay, for the sake of drawing mechs, we're gonna ask them in this order. Why? Why does this mech exist? What is the function of the mech? This is the most important bit. Everything has a function, a purpose, so answering this question will inform all your other decisions afterwards. A mech made for construction is going to look very different to a mech made for underwater exploration. Let's say I want to draw a mech made for reconnaissance on the battlefield. How does this mech perform its function? If it's a transport mech, then it should have a space for carrying things. Or if it's meant to lift heavy stuff, then it's gotta have arms. So for my reconnaissance mech, I'm gonna give it a ton of sensors and cameras because that's what I want it to do. Which brings me to what? What kind of mech? Is it humanoid, bipedal, quadrupedal? Is that even a real word? It's time to figure out some basics. How big, how many wheels, if it has any. Now's the time to figure out the framework of your mech. I'm gonna make mine bipedal because I want it to feel fast, like a sprinter. Okay, the next one is who. Who's driving this thing? This one's pretty straightforward. If a person is piloting it, draw in a cockpit. Where does your mech operate? Now we're thinking about the environment in which the mech lives in. Urban areas, outer space, underwater. For mine, I want to make it a snow mech, so I'm going to have to give it some snowshoes or something like that so it can move around in deep snow. Depending on where you want to set your mech in, there are many different types of design requirements that you have to add in and inform your design decisions so that your mech can operate in them. When is this mech made? A mech made in the near future, 50 years from now let's say, will look vastly different to a mech made 1,000 years from now. Generally, I think the further in the future you go, the more abstract the shapes can get. So you can even have fun with it and go do some stuff from the past and draw some samurai mechs. Okay, now that we have our answers, we can start drawing our mech. Okay, so the first thing, as always, is to start with thumbnails. And now, if you haven't heard this before, well, thumbnails are basically a really quick way and non-committal way to just get your design on paper. And it allows you to really quickly iterate on your designs before you commit to the full thing. So let's just recap what we got so far, as far as, answering the previous questions and building our design around those. So number one, it's a reconnaissance mech. I want it to be bipedal because, as a recon mech, you're running around places gathering information really fast, like kind of like a scout, right? So it's got to be bipedal. The next one is environment, I think. So it's got to be in an Arctic thing. I just decided that, so I want to give it like snowshoes or a really wide surface area for the shoe or legs because it has to walk above the snow and not sink into like really deep snow. I didn't really talk about this before, but I guess as far as the who, there's not going to be a pilot in the mech. It's going to be either remotely piloted or autonomous, because it's just moving so fast and it's really light. So there isn't going to be a cockpit. I'm just going to have like a bunch of sensors and like camera things, like a drone, so to indicate that it can see and think on its own. And the last one, as far as where, I guess it's something like a near future military type mech, just because the design of the sensor package and the cameras kind of look like what we have today, as far as when you look at like attack helicopters or like predator drones and things like that. They have like a camera or lidar sensor in front. Even like the big dogs by Boston Dynamics, they have that. So I'm using those designs and just like bringing them into the mech, just to give it like a real world current day military type thing. So like, let's say if it was a design for maybe like modern warfare, like Call of Duty, which is like set slightly in the future now, I think, then this mech would fit right in place. So regarding like the underlying sketch or just drawing without a sketch, I see a lot of comments about that, and I don't think it's that a big deal, because I have the thumbnail on the bottom left. You can see that there as reference, so I'm just literally kind of copying that and just enlarging and giving it a bit more detail. So it really isn't as impressive as some of you think, and especially when it comes to mech, it's just something that I'm so comfortable drawing that I feel really okay with just going with the lines, and I'll figure out later. Like if I mess up, I'll fix it somehow, and I do mess up here quite a bit, and you see some of the lines and the perspective is they're not correct, but at the end of the day, it's just a lot less trouble than having to draw it twice basically. I also just want to add that when it comes to drawing mechs, like fine pen, like the high-tech C is really amazing for stuff like this, because it's so fine. You can get like a lot of details in there, and you can get those lines to be really sharp and really clean and indicate that granular level of detail, like cut lines and beveled edges really clearly. And in a way, it kind of just forces you to think it through before drawing, because you can't really get away with a lot of things, especially if you're just like drawing it line by line so clearly. Like with a brush pen or maybe like a thicker pencil or something like that, you might be able to get away with some stuff just because your lines are so thick that there's just not much detail that you can fit into a drawing of this size, for instance. But when it comes to a ballpoint pen like this, where the line is so fine, you kind of don't have any excuse to not draw that stuff in. And in a way, if you don't draw it in, it kind of looks unfinished, or at the very least, it just gives you a lot more room to play with. And so if you want to just add that level of detail, you can. Okay, so let's just break down what I did a little bit here, just so you get a better understanding of what's going on, what I'm thinking, right? So, moving back to the thumbnail, the first thing I'm thinking about is the skeleton. So, if you're going to draw a kind of like a stick man, but for mechs, right? So, the skeleton goes like that. This is the okay, so this is the body, and then there's a I would call it the torso going down the middle, and then you have the hips, and then from there there's a joint here for the thighs. There's another joint here for the second part of the leg, and then there's another joint here, and then there's another joint here for the feet. So this is kind of the skeleton and the frame in which I am building the mech around, essentially. Right, so having that in mind, I guess the next thing that I think about is the joints. So how do these joints move, in which direction? Because there are many different types of joints, right? Even the human skeleton has, like, you know, hinge joints and ball and socket joints, many different types. So you got to think about how these rotate. So for example, the first one up here might be the torso, because you want to make it turn around. So you might want to make it rotate this way, like that. The pen's a little bit light, but you kind of get the idea. It's a circular rotation that goes like that. Second one, which is the leg joints here, will go this way, right? Just draw that out a little bit better. Go this way. So you kind of want to draw, you kind of want to look at references and draw joints that are kind of rotating this way. You might even want to have a joint and additional thing here that tilts this way, so you get a tilt this like that, and then the leg moves this way. So you kind of want to make it like a compound joint, and I'll get into that a little bit. So, but first of all, let's just think about the rotation, right? So these go like that, and then this one, obviously, it's kind of like a knee, so it goes this way, like that. This one, I was thinking that maybe there's a rotation that is round this way, so you can it kind of swivels this way as well. And then obviously this one just goes this way, like that. Okay, and then the last one is the feet. So your feet are kind of like your hands, for example. They kind of can pivot in many different ways and in very complex angles and rotations. So I just decided to just make it a ball joint, so that you can, you know, the ball joint just goes in every single direction, so you can kind of rotate it however you want. So that's the first thing. That's the second thing I'm thinking about, right? The skeleton, and then the rotation of the joints, how each joint moves in relation to the big thing, so that, you know, this mech can walk, essentially. Then we'll get into the mechanical bits. A lot of people like say that there's a lot of detail in like mechs and stuff like that, but really there isn't if you kind of break it down into simplified pieces. So let's take this joint for example. This is the simplest one because it's like it's just one axis of rotation. So let's just take this one, and then we'll move it down here. A good thing to learn and study when it comes to drawing mechs is just joints and like mechanical sockets and hinges and things like that. So even if you make this like a one rotation, it's kind of like you can use like a door hinge, for example, right? So you could use that as a reference for how to draw a hinge. So that's kind of a joint, right? So if you have a piece here, and then you have a piece that's going this way, then you have a mechanical joint. Now it's a little bit more complex than that, because you want to give it like a little bit of design and complexity, and it sort of has to power itself if you're thinking logically. So you might want to be looking at construction equipment, for example, right? Like a bulldozer, or one of those, like, I don't know, tractor type things. They might have a joint that goes like that, right? So I don't know what to call this, the earth movers or stuff like that. So they have a joint that goes in one direction here. That. So you might want to look at pictures for construction equipments and like hydraulics, just to get a better idea of what these things are like. So if that's the case, then you might have a hydraulic piston here that's powering this rotation. So that rotation is being powered by some sort of hydraulic, in kind of like the same way the tendons in our fingers are powered essentially. This one here is a compound joint, which means that it goes in two separate directions. Say you want to draw this joint now, and this joint goes in two different axes. So let's just break it down into its individual movements. You have one axis that goes this way, and then you want to have a tilt mechanism like that, right? That's what I'm thinking about. So we could draw something like that, right? So if you look at a swivel chair, for example, that's a swivel mechanism that turns in one axis, on one axis like that. So you could actually just use that as reference. You could just draw that and like copy paste it onto the joints of your mech. But of course, if you're gonna make it like a cool design, then you gotta make it look a bit more complex and add a bit of form to it and make it like cooler, I guess. But you know, the basic structure and the basic form and you know how it works is essentially the same thing. It's just like a cylinder with some sort of like a rotation on this axis. It's pretty simple. I'm just gonna add some thickness here, give it a little bit of weight and dimension, and then like now I want that sort of tilty mechanism. So I'm just gonna add a bunch of pistons. I'm just gonna give it a thicker base first, just to give it some structure stability, and then I'm gonna add these two pistons to act as the tilting mechanism. Right, so or maybe we could do 3 just because, like, you know, it's a bit more stable. Okay, so and then, you know, this connects to the rest of the body. So when the piston extends this way and the top piston shortens, then it would tilt the plate upwards. So that's how you get the tilting action. And then vice versa, you know, if the top one extends and then the bottom one shortens, then it tilts the other way. And honestly, that's really it. It's really that simple. That is your mechanism. You can make it as complex as you want, make it look as complex as you want, but at the end of the day, it's just that. And that's it really. Just like, mech drawings aren't really as complicated as you know it seems. It's just really fancy, I guess. It really is as simple as joining two planes together and then having them move. So assuming this is like an arm or a leg or something, you could make a joint that goes this way, right? And that's all it is really. You're just looking at mechanical joints and just studying like some semblance of like engineering, like bits of engineering, and how some mechanisms work and how they're powered, and then all you're doing is just adding stuff onto it to make it fancy. So I think it's really important that you just start simple. So that's like that's a cube, and in the middle you have some sort of cylinder joining these two things. And you know, some of it has to be logical, so you gotta look at like clearances and things like that. Like, you know, if this space is too tight, then it might not be able to rotate because, you know, things might hit each other or like clash into each other. But like, you know, if you're just drawing for fun, you don't really have to think about that kind of stuff too much, at least not yet, until, you know, much later. So I think it's a matter of just observing how some things are fit together. Like if you're looking at robots that work in an assembly line, you know, putting cars together and stuff like that, you know, you can learn a lot just by looking at how things fit together. Even like your door, for example, can work as a reference for stuff like this. It really depends on what you're interested in and how far you want to go. And that's it. Then that's your knee of the mech, or like an arm or something like that, right? And then you can just join that to a main body, and then you can join an arm or leg here, and you just build that skeleton, and you just do this. You just draw cubes and cylinders, and you flesh it out. That's my mech tutorial. I don't know.